Okay, so the more I think about the last video I've made, the more things comes to mind that I've forgotten to mention. So I thought I would make an addendum video to add to some of the themes that was covered in the last. This is mainly around the soul trap and the underlying assumption that reincarnation is a thing, because that's what the whole soul trap theory is based on. There's this just presumption that reincarnation is a fact, so then you can extrapolate a whole bunch of theory crafting around this, I would say, an axiom. So just a reminder, um, a principle is the root cause of something, the origin, or the archetype, the cause. It comes about through a deductive filtering process to refine things down to their core. Then an axiom is a presumption of what a principle could be that can't be verified based on limitations of measuring devices. So I guess axioms are quite good in the area of philosophy where we can't verify 100%. At least, when I say verification, it's quite a atheistic stance to take, but what has physical matter and what we're even talking about with through the human avatar and voice really got to do with anything outside of the idea of a material world. So it's the only tools we have, at least at this level of reality, to acquire some form of information that's useful to the direct experience of physicality. Now, there's obviously like resonant effects which I think trickle through a multitude of layers, but they're more transference of information through various um, proxies. So I'd suggest taking a look at my um, information proxy video and 50% rule if you don't understand that. But essentially, it's information being transformed through different mediums such that you can represent something in a different form, kind of like how when you say shout on still water, the vibrations, well, first of all, there's some electrochemical signal in your brain which then induces the ATP, which is stored as like a chemical potential in your muscles to release, which causes mechanical motion, which then vibrates the air. So already you're going from one medium, which is electrochemical, to something that's um, chemical mechanical, to something that is based on floating molecules, which is the air, to then oscillating the surface of a liquid form. So this is the same information, bearing in mind, just transformed through various proxies. And even though the waves on the surface of the water is not actually the origin, so in this case the origin would be spirit, the waves on the water is in a different medium and it's representative of the message. So that would be spirit's presence as a representation within the idea of the demiurge's mind, or the idea of the demiurge. Bearing in mind that demiurge, I think, is spirit, or it doesn't make sense that it wouldn't be spirit because everything originates to a monad in the end, like I explained in the last video. My thoughts on that, to an all, but just in a degraded state, or it's like a mistake in the mind of God. So anyway, the soul trap, yeah, has this underlying assumption that reincarnation is real. So I spoke about it in the video and in the videos that I do, and I actually forget that this is something that I arrived at an explanation for many years ago, and I almost take it as just second nature now without needing to explain it. But because uh, I'm on the topic of talk about principles and axioms, I thought it would be fitting to explain what I think reincarnation is and how I think it works from a principled perspective. So, um, in the same way that one of the principles here, or axioms, should I say, here is that this place is dualistic but is an attractor towards entropy and cannibalization, which is basically, in scientific terms, the second law of thermodynamics, which is to say that um, all things have a tendency towards entropy and a neutral state, because sustaining these bodies is a form of order, and there's suffering involved to maintain the order against the environment, which wants to take all of you as a chemical potential basically and take it down to a neutralized state. Yeah, so my explanation um, for the soul trap would be to first, because I'm taking a inside out approach to this and trying to find the causal link, I have to use a few tools. So the first one is to observe the first law of thermodynamics, which is the conservation of energy. So energy is never lost or created. So energy in physical terms is the stored potential to do work, and that's a mathematical concept of a force um, moving some material body a given distance. It's just you define it as force times distance, and this is a form of energy in physics terms, but it's basically saying that all forms of energy can only be transformed. It can never be created or lost. So for me, with that and the Hermetic principle of correspondence, which is now in the realm of philosophy, um, we could argue that if the demiurge is creation of sub-realities, sub-universes, because it creates sub-universes because it is like the dark mirror of the actual creation that is not entropic or cannibalistic but symbiotic and creativity based. um, the demiurge wants to create sub-realities like the all does, except because what I was talking about in the last video, how the axiom of how the demiurge creates everything to a lower, creates sub realities to a lower resolution. I don't. The all doesn't do that. Instead, its sub realities are symbiotic with each other and of equal footing, just a different expression. You could think of them as the sovereign beings, which are all tied together by this like platonic world of ideals, which eventually goes into a state of no fault the further back you go. Um, is what I think people are referring to when they speak of endarkenment. Um, but because of this uh, axiom that sub-realities are created with lower resolution, uh, and looking at the principle of correspondence, I then said to myself that um, there must be there might be resonant effects if um, through transference of information through proxied layers within the demiurge's mind, um, that so we could then take the first law of thermodynamics, which can be verified at this level of reality, the energy can't be created or destroyed, and then take that into the next layer above, which could be this sphere of where the whole soul trap thing occurs and reincarnation. Um, so people, the whole new age notion that you evolve over time through different through different bodies and different lifetimes, uh, your spiritual essence, which I would have to be in agreement with the community that uh, what is a bit fucked up, because these sorts of lessons are lessons that are in relation to an embodied form, the idea of the human experience, which really has got nothing to do with anything, in my opinion, outside of this idea of the human experience. What's what's learning to resolve things such as jealousy got to do with a place where that doesn't even exist or could even be conceived of? Things like duality. Uh, so, um, but the argument, or the thing that I realize in terms of the spiritual evolution that they supposedly claim we need to reincarnate for, is that there's perhaps a um, there's residual effects which gets transferred across lifetimes, uh, in the subconscious, because obviously the ego is wiped out, the personality is wiped out, and some people have past life memories or pre-birth memories. We also have out-of-body near-death experiences. I can confirm for myself that I've had a near-death experience through pharmacologically induced through DMT. Um, so I definitely um, know that there are such sub-realities in the etheric and astral realms of the demiurge's mind. Uh, and then you can say, well, because if we define energy outside of the confines of the physics definition, um, then and we apply the first law of thermodynamics with correspondence, then I could make an axiom or claim an axiom that reincarnation is a thing and that there is some kind of essence that survives the physical death, and then the the physical form with, because I think beings incarnate, people talk about bodies being organic portals, which people use as synonyms for the NPC, but I don't look at it exactly as the NPC exclusively, because it seems like, yes, the NPC is an organic portal for the hive mind, um, which is more of like the egoic psychological layer of the demiurge's expression, because the whole thing is the demiurge. Um, that also other other beings are capable of incarnating through the organic portal, but it's in relation to brain structure and what fault loops are capable of being in resonant with the structure. And this is an epigenetic um, thing, because you can have uh, you can be predisposed to being resonant with a particular kind of entity, whether it's the spiritual essence or more of the demiurge. But it can also be influenced by environment. And yeah, once again, I'd suggest taking a look at the feedback loops and 50% rule video for more of an explanation on this. But uh, traumatic or spiritual experiences can definitely be environmental factors, or it might not even be something that's has to be a trauma. It could be something that is carried out over time based on the place that you live in. Like you would definitely have a more pessimistic outlook on the world if you're, say, a kafir being hunted down by the church, uh, than I guess how it is now, which is more, it's still a similar level of aggression by the demiurge, but I guess at least living in the Western world, you won't be burnt at the stake. Um, so it definitely has an effect, is based on genetics. So what I'm saying is that there is material correspondence that the essence is capable of resonating with. So then it just goes into a body, and then the supposed personality traits of the previous life is now capable of expressing itself, and then doing the somewhat spiritual evolutionary process that the New Agers love, because they love to be here and they want to keep reincarnating here so that they can basically stay here. Um, so yeah, that's what it is. I would consider reincarnation to be an axiom. Um, I can see a direct causal uh, link to how that could work through deductive reasoning. It's in the realm of philosophy, so I won't claim it's a fact because I can't measure it with material probes, which is really the only thing that I can use that's useful at this level of reality. Um, Everything else is just um, by way of an explanation of proxy and proxied information, kind of like in my analogy that I made in the last video of how the video game character could only become aware of its creator by an explanation that it is a video game character, and that there are various unknowable rules such as a physical circuit board and the software that's loaded into the circuit board, um, that it could create as like an abstraction to explain its existence, but it will never know the circuit board or what software it is. It could only allude to the idea of some informational form which is able to hold it. So I guess another thing I wanted to talk. So that's how I came to um, that's my own understanding of reincarnation. That's my reasoning behind why it's a thing. Not to mention the numerous accounts from other people. So this is like a psychological study, which is the same methodology where you can only take subjective accounts from people. And there's loads and loads of accounts of these sorts of things, the pre-birth memories and the near-death experiences. So it's very plausible, in my opinion. And the next thing I want to talk about is does the soul trap apply to spirit? And so yeah, just go back into my previous content about the three types of man. You don't understand this, but essentially the the model is around the idea that spirit can't be incarnate here. It's impossible because the substance of spirit is wholly not of the demiurge. If spirit was here in any form, the demiurge couldn't exist. It's like yin and yang. Um, and the only way it's here is by way of representation, like what I was just talking about, a proxied form. Uh, and so for me, like the soul is just another body in this place, and it can probably escape the soul trap at that level, but it's still a part of the demiurge. It's how it's been described as Sophia's ego. It has her intent, but where the ego is at this level of reality is just the demiurge creating a sub-reality of lower resolution, like the axiom claims. So I'd think that Sophia's ego is a similar thing, and that is actually the spiritual essence that escapes. Not that it was even here to begin with, because I don't think it is here. Uh, because of the axiom that spirit, it's impossible for spirit to actually be part of the demiurge. Uh, so you could think of the damage to the spiritual essence to be more like akin to a child dying of dehydration due to being addicted to a video game. So you've heard of these horror cases where children die from like blood clots or um, dehydration from playing video games in these internet cafes in China for multiple days, and they're so fixated on the game. And this has happened, by the way. I'm not just making this up. They were so fixated on the game that they forgot about their physical body, and they died because they were literally sucked into that world. And this place is like a hall of mirrors. And if you are spirited, and to be spirited here in the physical means that, in my opinion, soul is a prerequisite. Uh, soul needs to be is a vital component. Soul, you need a soul in order to interface with the material world. It's kind of like if the human is the spirit, the game controller is the soul, and then the game is the material world. So think of it like that. Once again, proxied informational forms. Um, so, uh, to my mind, it's really uh, the danger is that spirit can become so fixated on an identification. Firstly, the possibility, which I think most of the spiritual essences here end up identifying with the body, and then secondly, um, I guess if they become more somewhat sophisticated, identify with the soul. And this is, I think a lot of that's happening around the soul trap. I think there's a lot of entities which are, you know, purely souled. I preface the spectrum again, so I'm not labeling people, but the archetype of the purely souled, uh, some spiritual essence in there gets influenced, and then you get lost in the demiurge's mind. I explained in the cosmology video that I think that because of the abomination of what it is, what the demiurge is, its danger to creation because it's like a cancer. We think about things in regards to time, but I think that it's already been destroyed outside of linear time. It's just something you can't really conceive of because this mind is a three-dimensional with a fourth, X, Y, and Z, with a fourth dimension of time, all instances of X, Y, and Z. And it's something that's higher dimensional than that can't really be conceived of with this kind of mind. I mean, quantum mechanics goes into the idea of 12 dimensions, but it really becomes convoluted beyond 3 dimensions. Time becomes quite mind bending, and we're even entities of that. Um, but I think that from the stance of my phenomenological experience and my disgust for how this reality operates, um, I wouldn't allow this thing to exist. And I say wouldn't because that's in relation to time. But I think that this is outside of time and it's probably already been destroyed, except it seems that this place is going on here. And the only way that I can explain the reason why this is happening is that this is kind of like a program that's being executed by virtue of infinity. And I can't really I can't really explain that uh, myself to any like more of a fine-grained detail with language, but I hope that that makes sense as an idea. Um, so it's really the spiritual essence that needs to just tear its eyes away from the screen, and I don't think that spirit reincarnates. It's more that it becomes superimposed with the multitude of layers, but the whole area around the cosmology of the soul is still just another layer of the demiurge's mind. Um, so what to do? I mean, because if you claim to be spirited, so you're here. Um, and for me, my goal is to try and alleviate my pain and try and avoid the hive mind as much as I can, ride out my sentence to the end, and just imbue my will into the fabric of the demiurge as a big fuck you, and create the act of creation is a truly cathartic source of inspiration for myself. Um, I don't know what it would be for other people, but I don't actually get depressed, and I also don't feel trapped here either. I treat this more like a prison sentence. I think I was perhaps gullible to arrive here. I think about what the purpose of spirit could be here. So I know I said in my last video I'm sold, um, and that's true because spirit can't incarnate here. So we'll talk about the representation. Um, but then what would be the purpose of having a representation? And to be honest, I'm not too sure what it could be. It could just be a kind of naivete, because how I explain the sovereign beings outside of the demiurge's mind is that they don't have a complete universe within themselves. That is complete um, information, complete knowledge of everything, because to have a difference between sovereign beings implies the idea of difference between them that encompasses the information that makes them unique. So if they had each other's information, they would not be unique. So so that implies blind spots even outside of the demiurge's mind, and it so it could be possible that where your experiences with all other sovereign beings has been one of symbiosis and creation, you couldn't have imagined the density and darkness of the demiurge's inversion. since it was created in ignorance of the all. So that's one possibility. Another possibility is that, and I think that these possibilities apply differently to each kind of spiritual essence that has ended up here, because I believe we are all different and unique. Um, it could be that some other spiritual essences um, thought that they could save this place, and perhaps that was true to begin with. But the demiurge is kind of like a child throwing a tantrum, and it's desperately clawing onto survival. It has this existential dilemma where it needs to cannibalize on the rest of creation outside of itself to sustain itself, when all it's got to do is just act in symbiosis with it and accept the unconditional love and embody it in itself. But it doesn't want to do that because it's an inversion. So it needs to be put out of its misery, and I think it already has. And if I'm still in here, or if anyone else is still in here, well, you just get thrown back into the primordial soup. But it's fine though, because the substance gets transformed back into something that is a sovereign being of symbiosis. And when I say you're in here and you get thrown out, I don't mean you're in here and you get thrown out. I mean that you enter into a catatonic state outside of here, and you can almost be convinced by the demiurge's ideas to create something in and of itself, something that is akin to a copy of the demiurgic realm, um, which then needs to be quarantined because it spreads like a cancer. But I don't think that that's happened. And if that has, I say it has happened in time. It's not in time. So this is where it gets so fucking difficult to explain. Um, but if it's been resolved, that's what I'm saying. Uh, if any of this stuff, if spiritual essences were corrupted, then they had to be quarantined as well. Just not in time. Uh, so yeah, that's. I think that's all I want to cover here. Um, I don't think the soul should be outside of the demiurge's mind. The soul is basically another body of the demiurgic multiverse, just of a higher order degree and a prerequisite for the material world. But nonetheless, I don't know how many layers of the demiurge's mind there are, but how, both vertically and horizontally. So, um, who knows? We categorize the soul. Who's to say that the soul can't be fragmented into um, hundreds or even thousands of subtypes? But this is where the limits of the 3D mind comes in, because these are things that are just completely not only impractical to try and answer, but impossible at the same time at this level, with this limited human mind. Yeah, so yeah, I think it's important to think about the assumptions made around certain conspiracies. Like, I've really considered reincarnation. Therefore, for me, it's possible to entertain the fact that the soul trap is a thing. I don't think it's the only thing that's happening. In fact, I think it's a really tiny piece of the puzzle. Uh, but yeah, like the reincarnation for me is based on the first law of thermodynamics, combined with the principle of correspondence to make it into to propose a principle behind how this operates, which is now an axiom, and I incorporate that as part of my model. Um, I don't think that the soul um, is something that escapes from this reality. I think it's spirit that doesn't escape. I don't think spirits even entered this place, but spirit is by way of representation, just how like your will is projected into a video game. Um, and you know this is based on the axioms of spirit. It's impossible for spirit to incarnate here. What else supports that? Um, yeah, truth can't be captured in language, and Demiurge creates copies, tries to copy the creation of the all's capability of creating sub-realities at low resolution. Uh, okay, yeah, I think that's all I want to add to as an addendum to the last video, and yeah, hopefully that makes sense to you guys, and take care out there, and I'll speak to you to next time.